Think about your daily online life for a moment. Checking your bank balance, maybe buying something online, or just browsing. How do you actually know your private data is, well, safe when it's flying across the internet? It's something we kind of take for granted, isn't it? Today, on the deep dive, we're going behind the scenes, looking at the silent guardians of that security. Secure Socket Layer, SSL, and its successor, Transport Layer Security, TLS. Our mission here is to trace their, well, surprising and often bumpy evolution. We'll highlight the vulnerabilities that kept popping up and explore why the latest versions are so critical for your digital safety. We're drawing on insights from a really comprehensive master's research paper out of the University of Alberta, plus some recent analyses of current TLS standards. What you'll find is it's a story of constant innovation, sure, but also this relentless cat-and-mouse game. Security versus exploit. It just keeps going. Okay, before we jump right into SSL and TLS themselves, maybe let's set the stage just a bit. What's the fundamental science making all this security actually work?
Right.
At the heart of it all is cryptography. It's basically the science of hiding data, making sure only the right people can see it or use it. Fundamentally, it gives us four key things: integrity, confidentiality, authentication, and non-repudiation.
Okay, can you break those down a bit? Integrity sounds like making sure the data hasn't been messed with.
Exactly. Integrity means ensuring data hasn't been modified in transit. Think of it like a digital fingerprint, often called hashing. If even one bit changes, the fingerprint changes completely. Then there's confidentiality. That's about making sure only authorized users can actually read the data. This is where encryption comes in, scrambling the information using keys.
Right, like a secret code.
Precisely. And authentication is proving you are who you say you are, like your username and password, but often more sophisticated digitally. Finally, non-repudiation. This means someone can't later deny they did something, like sending a message or authorizing a payment. Digital signatures are key here.
You mentioned keys for encryption. That seems central. What are the main types we're dealing with? Good question. There are two main flavors. First is secret key cryptography, or SKC. You might also hear it called symmetric encryption. Here, both sides use the same single secret key to encrypt and decrypt. It's super fast, really efficient for large amounts of data.
Like a shared password almost?
Kind of, yeah. Think ADS, that's the modern standard, used everywhere, with key sizes like 128, 192, 256 bits. Older ones like DES, well, that's long gone. 56 bits is just too small now. 3DES was an improvement, but it's also being phased out. And RC4, definitely avoid that one. It's been breakable for years.
Okay, so that's symmetric. What's the other type?
The other is public key cryptography, PKC, or asymmetric encryption. This is quite different. It uses a pair of keys, a public key, and a private key. The public key can be shared with anyone. People use it to encrypt messages for you, but only you, with your secret private key, can decrypt them.
Ah, so that solves the problem of how to share the secret key in the first place.
Exactly. It's brilliant for key exchange and digital signatures, though it's a bit slower for encrypting lots of data. Think algorithms like RSA 2048 bits is pretty standard now, and ECC, elliptic curve cryptography, which is great for smaller devices like phones because it's more efficient. And Diffie-Hellman is a classic method specifically used for two parties to agree on a shared secret key over an insecure line.
Wow. It's amazing how these pieces fit together. They're really the invisible engine behind so much of what we do online.
Absolutely. Your online banking, shopping, even secure messaging, it all relies on these cryptographic building blocks working correctly in the background. It's all about establishing that digital trust.
Okay, so with that cryptographic foundation laid, let's dive into the history of SSL and TLS specifically. I remember reading about Amazon's first book sale back in '95. Suddenly, everyone needed secure ways to pay online. That must have been a huge driver.
Oh, definitely. The rise of e-commerce created an urgent need, and Netscape, under Tara El-Gamal, was right there at the forefront trying to solve it. Their first attempt was SSL 1.0 back in 1994, but it was seriously flawed. Vulnerable to things like replay attacks, where an attacker could just capture and resend data, and even letting attackers alter messages without detection. It was so bad, apparently, that computer scientist Philip Hallam Baker once said he and Alan Schiffman broke it in about 10 minutes, so... yeah, never got a public release.
10 minutes. Okay, not a great start. What came next? SSL 2.0.
Yep, SSL 2.0 came out in February 1995. This was the one that really formed the basis for early HTTPS, but it had its own serious problems, what we call structural vulnerabilities. For instance, the initial handshake messages, where the client and server agree on settings, they weren't protected, so a man-in-the-middle attacker could jump in and force them to use weaker encryption.
Oh, that's not good.
Not at all. Plus, attackers could easily cut off sessions. And a big issue was it used the same cryptographic keys for both encrypting the data and ensuring its integrity. That mixing of purposes is generally seen as a bad security practice. So SSL 2.0 was eventually deprecated in 2011.
So Netscape had to go back to the drawing board again, version 3.0.
Right. SSL 3.0 arrived in November 1996. It was a significant step up. It tackled the man-in-the-middle issue by adding a hash, like a fingerprint, of the whole handshake conversation. It also allowed clients to interrupt a handshake if something seemed wrong and supported more certificate types using SHA-1 hashing. But even SSL 3.0 wasn't perfect.
Always a but, isn't there?
Seems like it. It had weaknesses in how sessions were resumed, and it used a type of padding extra data added during encryption that wasn't always checked properly. That led to the famous Poodle attack later on. Plus, its reliance on SHA-1 and even MD5 hashing algorithms became a major concern as those were found to be weak.
So the industry realized SSL needed a more formal, standardized approach.
Exactly. The effort moved under the umbrella of the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, in the mid-90s, and that led to the birth of TLS Transport Layer Security. It was designed to be the successor, building on SSL 3.0, but aiming for better security and standardization.
And the first version was TLS 1.0 based on SSL 3.0.
Correct. TLS 1.0 was released in January 1999. It aimed for improvement, but kept backward compatibility with SSL 3.0. Unfortunately, that compatibility itself became a vulnerability. Attackers could potentially force action to downgrade to the weaker SSL 3.0.
Ah, the downgrade attack. I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme. TLS 1.0 also had its share of issues. Remember that incident in 2001? An attacker managed to get fraudulent code signing certificates by impersonating Microsoft. That highlighted weaknesses beyond just the protocol itself. And over time, vulnerabilities like Beast and Crime were discovered that specifically targeted weaknesses in TLS 1.0, plus it still supported older, weaker crypto. So eventually, the big players, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Mozilla, all agreed to deprecate it officially in September 2020.
A coordinated move by the industry.
A necessary one. And TLS 1.1, which came out in 2006, kind of suffered the same fate. It was deprecated right alongside 1.0 in September 2020. TLS 1.1 did introduce some fixes, like a better way to handle the initialization vector, the HORFI, to defend against certain attacks on CBC mode encryption. But fundamentally, it still allowed outdated algorithms like SHA-1 and MD5, and crucially, it didn't mandate perfect forward secrecy.
Perfect forward secrecy. What's the core idea there?
The idea is that even if an attacker somehow gets hold of a server's long-term private key, they still shouldn't be able to decrypt past recorded conversations. Each session should use unique temporary keys that are discarded afterwards. TLS 1.1 didn't enforce this, making it vulnerable if a key got compromised later.
Okay, so that continuous cycle of find flaw, patch flaw, find new flaw, that finally led us to TLS 1.2, right?
Yeah.
Which was the standard for a long time.
Yes. TLS 1.2, released in August 2008, was a really big step forward and became the workhorse for years. It was the default in most browsers for a long time. It made significant improvements. It ditched the problematic MD5 SHA-1 combinations for integrity checks and allowed stronger, more modern hash algorithms like SHA-256. It also formally introduced authenticated encryption modes like AES-GCM, which combine confidentiality and integrity in a more robust way.
But here's where it gets really interesting, as you mentioned earlier. Even TLS 1.2, the gold standard for so long, is now under scrutiny. Why the push away from it? Sounds like it fixed a lot.
It did fix a lot. But the issue with TLS 1.2 isn't so much that it's fundamentally broken, but more about its flexibility. It offers a very wide range of configuration options, including cipher suites that we now know are weak or problematic.
Like the kind of options.
Well, it allows cipher suites using SHA-1, or the RC4 stream cipher, or older CBC modes of encryption, or key exchanges based purely on RSA. If a server is configured to allow these, even if it also supports stronger options, an attacker might be able to force the connection to use the weaker ones. And that other key point, perfect forward secrecy, PFS, is optional in TLS 1.2. If it's not explicitly enabled and configured using methods like Diffie-Hellman or elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, ECDHE, then compromising the server's long-term key could indeed compromise past sessions.
So it can be secure, but it's easy to misconfigure it to be insecure.
That's a good way to put it. Plus, new vulnerabilities like ZOMBIE POODLE and Golden Doodle specifically found ways to exploit some of these remaining weaknesses, even in TLS 1.2 configurations.
So the industry, the big tech companies, compliance bodies, they're all pushing for something better.
Exactly. Compliance frameworks like FedRAMP, HIPAA, PCI DSS, ISO 27001, they're increasingly disallowing these insecure cipher combinations even within TLS 1.2. Microsoft Azure is actively rolling out TLS 1.3 and tightening requirements for 1.2, like phasing out 3DS completely by early 2025. NIST strongly recommends TLS 1.3, or at least very hardened TLS 1.2 configurations. Modern browsers are pushing hard for 1.3 too.
Which brings us finally to TLS 1.3, the latest and greatest. What makes it the solution to these problems?
TLS 1.3, which came out in 2018, was really designed to learn from all these past mistakes. It's a major overhaul, first big win, faster handshakes. It cuts down the back and forth needed to establish a secure connection, usually just one round trip, compared to 2 or even 3 in older versions. It even has a feature called zero round trip time resumption, 0 RTT, for returning visitors, making things feel much quicker.
Less waiting for the little padlock icon to appear.
Well, pretty much. Second, it has simplified and much stronger cipher suites. This is huge. TLS 1.3 completely removes support for all those problematic legacy algorithms, SHA-1, RC4, DES, 3DEs, AECBC, MD5, static RSA key exchange. They're just gone.
Taking away the dangerous option.
Exactly. It drastically reduces the attack surface and the potential for misconfiguration. It only specifies 5 mandatory to implement cipher suites, all based on modern authenticated encryption like AES GCM or CHA-20 Poly 305. It even encrypts more of the handshake itself, hiding things like the server certificate from passive eavesdroppers. And third, remember perfect forward secrecy. In TLS 1.3, PFS is mandatory. It requires the use of ephemeral key exchange methods like ECDHE. Every session gets fresh temporary keys. Compromising a server's long-term key won't let anyone decrypt past traffic, period.
That sounds like a massive security improvement.
It really is. And because of all this, it naturally aligns with stronger compliance requirements and gets strong recommendations from agencies like NIST, the NSA, and CISA. All major browsers and cloud providers support it now. It's built for security from the ground up.
That evolution makes so much sense when you lay it out like that. But it was really driven by attackers finding holes, wasn't it? Let's talk about some of those specific attacks that forced these changes. It really shows that cat and mouse game in action.
Absolutely. Looking at the attacks puts the protocol changes into sharp focus. They weren't just theoretical improvements, they were direct responses to real-world exploits. Okay, let's start with Beast. That was back in September 2011, famously demonstrated against PayPal. It hit TLS 1.0. Beast exploited a weakness in how cipher blockchaining CBC mode worked in TLS 1.0. Specifically, the initialization vector for each message was predictable based on the end of the previous message. An attacker, through clever manipulation, a chosen plaintext attack, could inject data and observe the encrypted results to slowly guess sensitive info, like session cookies.
So predictability was the enemy there.
Exactly. Good crypto needs good randomness. While Beast was tricky to pull off in practice, it showed a fundamental flaw. The mitigation was ultimately moving away from TLS 1.0 and those predictable CBC modes, patching browsers, and preferring TLS 1.2.1.3.
Then came crime, right? Attacking compression.
Yep, September 2012. Crime compression ratio info leak made easy. This was clever. It didn't break the encryption directly, but exploited the compression used in TLS and the SPDY protocol. By injecting variations of potential secret data, like parts of a cookie, into requests and measuring the size of the compressed result, an attacker could infer the secret.
No.
If injecting cookie secret A resulted in a smaller compressed size than cookie secret B, it likely meant A was already present elsewhere in the compressed data stream.
Wow, using the compression size itself as a leak.
It's a classic side channel attack, the fix. Disable TLS compression. Most browsers did this pretty quickly. Next was Lucky 13 in February 2013. This one targeted CBC mode again, but in TLS 1.1 and even TLS 1.2 if they use CBC. It was a timing attack. It exploited tiny differences in how long the server took to respond depending on whether the padding added during decryption was correct or not. By measuring these time differences very precisely, attackers could figure out the original plaintext byte by byte.
Milliseconds mattering that much.
They can. It showed how careful implementations need to be. Mitigation involved making decryption times constant, like adding random delays, or better yet, switching to authenticated encryption modes like AES GCM, which don't have these padding oracle issues. And of course, ditching TLS 1.1.
Then April 2014, the big one, Heartbleed. That felt like it was everywhere.
Oh, Heartbleed was huge. It wasn't a flaw in the TLS protocol itself, but in a very popular implementation. The OpenSSL library, specifically a function called the Heartbeat extension, CVE 2014-0160. The heartbeat was meant to keep connections alive. You send a packet with some data and a length, and the other side sends it back. The flaw was that OpenSSL didn't check if the claimed length matched the actual data sent. An attacker could send a tiny request but claim a huge length, say 64 kilobytes.
And the server would just...
The vulnerable server would read that huge length, copy the tiny bit of actual data received, and then just keep copying whatever happened to be next in its memory up to 64 KB and send it back to the attacker.
Good grief. What kind of stuff was in memory?
Anything. Server private keys, user session cookies, usernames, passwords, confidential data. It was a catastrophic information leak. Because OpenSSL was used everywhere, the impact was massive. Mitigation was urgent. Patch OpenSSL immediately, generate new private keys, revoke old certificates, and force password resets. A real scramble. After that shock, in October 2014, we got POODLE, patting Oracle on downgraded legacy encryption. This one primarily targeted the old SSL 3.0. It was a combination of a downgrade attack and exploiting that weak CBC padding in SSL 3.0 we mentioned earlier. An attacker would trick a browser and server into negotiating down to SSL 3.0, then use the padding Oracle vulnerability to decrypt things like HTTP cookies.
So it exploited the fact that SSL 3.0 was still hanging around.
Precisely. Even in 2020, some servers were still vulnerable. The only real fix was to completely disable SSL 3.0 support on servers and clients and push everyone firmly towards TLS 1.2 or 1.3.
And the downgrade theme continued with Freak.
It did. Freak factoring RSA export keys popped up in March 2015. This was a fascinating historical throwback. Back in the 90s, the U.S. government restricted the export of strong cryptography. So browsers and servers supported weaker export-grade cipher suites, often using only 512-bit RSA keys.
512 bits, that sounds tiny compared to 2048 now.
It is. Even back then, it was breakable, just maybe not easily by everyone. The Freak attack allowed a man in the middle to trick modern clients and servers into negotiating one of these ancient, weak export suites. Then, the attacker could use cloud computing power to factor the 512-bit key relatively quickly, hours, maybe minutes, and decrypt the traffic.
Wow, a ghost from CryptoPath.
Absolutely. It affected tons of sites, even the NSAs apparently. Mitigation meant patching browsers and, crucially, disabling all support for these export-grade ciphers everywhere. And finally, just to show these things can come back, ZOMBIE POODLE emerged in February 2019. A sort of resurrection of the Poodle concept, but this time targeting TLS 1.2. Even though TLS 1.2 implementations usually check the padding correctly, ZOMBIE POODLE found subtle ways to leak information through side channels when certain older CVC cipher suites were still in use within TLS 1.2. It often involved injecting JavaScript into the victim's browser.
So even with fixes, the underlying complexity of those older modes was still risky.
Exactly. It really hammered home the point that even TLS 1.2 needed careful hardening and that the cleaner, simpler approach of TLS 1.3, which got rid of these modes entirely, was the way forward.
Okay, this history of attacks makes the push for TLS 1.3 crystal clear. So let's get practical. What does this all mean for you, the listener, right now? Is TLS 1.2 actually deprecated? Should you panic if you see it?
Right, that's the key takeaway question. Officially, TLS 1.2 is not deprecated in the same way 1.0 and 1.1 are. You won't necessarily see browsers blocking it outright yet.
Right.
But think of it as being strongly discouraged and definitely on a countdown clock. While it's still supported in many places, especially in complex enterprise setups where upgrades take time, the strong recommendation from security experts, browser makers, and compliance bodies is to move to TLS 1.3 as soon as possible.
So it's less about it being broken, more about it being risky if not handled perfectly.
That's it. The flexibility of TLS 1.2 is its double-edged sword. It allows those weaker ciphers we talked about, RC4, SHA-1, basic RSA, key exchange, CBC modes. Perfect forward secrecy is optional. If it's not configured perfectly hardened, as we say, it can leave doors open. TLS 1.3 closes those doors by design, and all the major players are signaling this shift. Microsoft Azure pushing 1.3, NIST preferring it, browsers getting ready to flag 1.2 only sites maybe. The writing is on the wall.
So if someone is still using TLS 1.2, maybe on their website or internal systems, what are the actual practical risks they're running today?
Okay, several things. First, service disruption. As platforms like cloud providers, CDNs, or maybe even browsers start disabling the weaker cipher suites within TLS 1.2, older clients or systems configured to only use those weak suites might suddenly fail to connect. Things just break. Second, compliance gaps. If you're subject to regulations like HIPAA, PCI DSS for payments, FedRAMP for government work, or ISO 27001, auditors are increasingly expecting TLS 1.3 or, at minimum, a very strictly hardened TLS 1.2 configuration. Just saying we use TLS 1.2 might not cut it anymore.
Right, the standards are getting tougher.
Definitely. Third, a potential false sense of security. Your server might support TLS 1.2, but if it also allows fallbacks to TLS 1.1 or 1.0, which it shouldn't, a network glitch or even an attacker could cause connections to silently downgrade to those much weaker protocols. You think you're secure, but you're not. And fourth, looking ahead, limited browser and client support. While not widespread yet, it's plausible that browsers will eventually start showing warnings like not fully secure for sites that only support TLS 1.2, especially if they allow weaker configurations. That erodes user trust.
That makes sense. It's a gradual tightening of the screws. So for our listener, what are the concrete steps they should be taking now? What's the action plan?
Okay, practical steps. First, audit your TLS usage. You need to figure out what's talking TLS in your environment. Clients, what servers, are there old Android devices pre-4.4, old Java apps, embedded systems, check server logs, use scanning tools, you need visibility. Second, if you absolutely cannot move off TLS 1.2 right away, you must harden its configuration. That means explicitly disabling insecure ciphers, RC4, 3DES, SHA-1-based ones, CBC modes if possible, enforce perfect forward secrecy using ECDHG suites, and critically, disable TLS 1.0, 1.1, and SSL v3 completely to prevent downgrades.
Lock it down tight.
As tight as possible. But the real goal is step 3. Upgrade your infrastructure for TLS 1.3. Enable it on your web servers. Apache, Nginx, IS on modern Windows Server, load balancers, application frameworks. Make sure your clients, browsers, apps can use it. If you're using cloud services like Azure or AWS, enable their TLS 1.3 options. Fourth, communicate with vendors. If you rely on third-party services or APIs, ask them about their TLS 1.3 support and timeline. You don't want their lack of upgrade to break your integration. And finally, enforce and monitor. Use configuration management tools, group policies, scripts, whatever fits your environment to enforce these secure settings. Don't just set it and forget it. Monitor your logs for any remaining legacy TLS traffic, find out why it's happening, and fix it.
That's a really clear roadmap. Audit, harden if necessary, upgrade ideally, communicate, and then enforce and monitor.
That's the gist of it. It's an ongoing process, not a one-off task.
It's definitely clear that while TLS 1.2 was a stalwart, its era is winding down. The move to TLS 1.3 isn't just, a nice-to-have upgrade. It really feels like a fundamental security requirement now for navigating our connected world safely. It's about closing off those avenues attackers kept exploiting. So as we wrap up, here's something to think about. Considering this constant back and forth, this cat-and-mouse game between the people designing security protocols and the people trying to break them, what proactive steps can you take in your own digital life, maybe beyond just updating software, to ensure you're always trying to stay ahead of the curve rather than just reacting when the next big vulnerability hits the headlines?